I'm Karen Swy-zick, and you're listening to the Bacon Bits and Bytes podcast. This is the podcast where a bit of business and a bite of technology come together.
All right, let's take two. Hi, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Bacon Bits and Bytes podcast. Today, I'm chatting with Shann McGrail. As the Executive Director for Haltech, part of the Regional Innovation Center Network in Ontario, Shan and her team are focused on the growth of startups and scale-up innovation companies. Having run her own software and consulting company focused on talent and creating successful partnerships, she identifies firsthand with the entrepreneurial mindset. Combined with years of experience in sales, consulting, and operations leadership roles at Microsoft, she brings a collaborative and strategic approach. Shan is also involved in women in technology initiatives through organizations such as Women in Communications and Technology, #HerHalton, the Innovation Factory's Accelerator for Women Entrepreneurs, and Haltech's recently announced Beyond Boundaries program to help more women entrepreneurs to think big and go global with their businesses. 10 years of improv training and performing has turned Shan into a big advocate of leading with yes, and she loves to introduce these concepts into business. Welcome to the show, Shan.
Well, thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here.
That's great. It's funny because your bio, I practiced reading it beforehand before we record this episode like 2-3 times. And it's funny, when we record, I seem to have stumbled on.
Oh, well, you know what? That's always how it happens. The minute the camera light or the record goes on, that's when we really start getting nervous.
Yeah. Okay. So let's first kind of like trail back into growing up. Would you consider yourself to be someone who often naturally assumed a leadership position? So I'm thinking, were you president or vice president of student clubs or the student council?
No, I really wasn't. It's not that I, shied away from it necessarily, but, the cold, hard truth was I was, that unpopular kid in elementary school and, sort of took my fair share sitting on the sidelines. And then I think, during high school started to figure out who I was a little bit more. And I had lots of different types of friends. So I learned and grew differently because I had exposure to lots of different groups and backgrounds. And then I think for me, I not to say I was a late bloomer, but I think I started to realize after university and as I started working that, my real strength was the ability to navigate through different groups, to navigate through different conversations, to bring people together. And, I would say if I look back, it wasn't that I ever said, I want to be the leader or I want to be the one in charge. But what I always did know about myself and the way I reacted was that I was more about independence. And I always had this aspect of I wanted to do what was right and fair and just. And that sort of just seemed to translate naturally as I grew a little bit and started working and figured out, what do I like to do? Who are the kinds of people I like to work with? And then I think it was at that stage where my more of my leadership style started to emerge.
That's quite interesting because I can kind of relate to growing up like in elementary school. I was very like shy and awkward and I got teased a bit and wasn't very popular. And yeah, it wasn't until high school because the elementary school was rather small, but then coming into high school because it's taking in all the kids from the surrounding elementary school. So it's interesting having a lot of different groups of friends and it just felt like I could connect with people better.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it was interesting because in preparation for this, I was kind of thinking about some of the different questions and, just different things that changed me in my background. And I would have said, at the time when I was younger, say high school, I would have loved to have been a great athlete. I wasn't. I would have loved to have been the genius in class. I wasn't. I would have loved to have been, the really popular, cheerleader type. I wasn't. But at the same time, I think it really sort of forced me to understand and work with and get to appreciate different strengths of all of these different friends I had in different groups. And then start to understand the value of being able to connect the dots and see things. I learned this from this group of friends, so I'm going to take it and apply it over here. And then I'm going to take what I learned there to another group. So I think that's a lot of what now translates into what I do.
I'd like to talk about, the various roles you had at Microsoft. So what are some lessons you've learned from working in and working with some of the biggest and most respected technology companies?
Ooh, that's a really, really great question. So I feel extremely fortunate to have had that opportunity to work in a big company. And some of the great learning that I had when I first started my career, I worked for another very large company who eventually was bought and merged in with Hewlett-Packard. And I would say when I started off, I learned the value of having really good core foundational skills. And for me, I started in sales. So I built my skills around communication, presentation skills, understanding how to communicate technology and business value. And those, learned those early on, had a lot of opportunity to get practice and, continued to build on those skills throughout my career. The other thing that I learned early on, being in sales is such a phenomenal opportunity, and anybody who's contemplating what to do with their career, or if you're at that stage or you're just starting, I would absolutely advise people to get some selling experience. And it's because you learn a lot from your customers. You got to learn how to take rejection, and you've got to learn how to sort of reframe opportunities and think about timing and really how to seize the opportunities that do come your way. So that would be one thing, is that a career in sales is extremely valuable, even if you decide to go down another path later on. And, all those foundational skills around communication and presenting and articulating problems and, the value of technology, absolutely core. And then I would say a little bit later on, as I, moved into Microsoft and then started to advance and take on more leadership positions, I think my skills around, how do you work with people and how do you tap into the potential of people and, harness what they're capable of and bring them along on whatever the mission is. So I think that would be one thing that I felt as I moved into more people management role was really important for me. And then I think the other all up one that was a lesson from working in big companies is that ideas are cheap, right? Anybody can come up with an idea. The real value is in what are you willing to do? What action are you going to take to make that idea a reality?
So what was it like, having gone from a big company to working as the executive director for Haltech?
Well, I had a little bit of a stop in between. So after I was with Microsoft is when I was running my own consulting and software company with my partner. And, it's very different. When you're working for a big company and you have this big brand to rely on, there weren't too many people that I couldn't call and say, hi, I'm from Microsoft. I'd like to talk to you about. Most people would be willing to listen and to grant you that meeting. When you go to a smaller company, you're just establishing yourself, you're not knocking on the doors of people who don't know you, but instead you're really tapping into your network, and you realize how important the trust you've built throughout your career starts to become when you're working on your own. Then there's a lot of simple things that you get in a big company that don't happen in a small company. And that could be anything like you had a marketing budget in a big company. You don't have that in a small company. You had somebody who worried about accounts receivable or payable. You don't have that. You realize when you're looking for somebody, it's just you. Mm-hmm. And one of the other things I've often found funny is when I worked for Microsoft, for example, and I got an error, some sort of a technology error, call your administrator. I could call somebody. Today, when I get that error, there's nobody to call. I am the administrator.
So I'd like to talk more about leadership. So we kind of, you mentioned a little bit about, tapping into the potential of people and tapping into the potential of people. I think I could probably make a blooper episode out of this if you're okay with it. All my stumbles today. We talked about tapping into the potential of people. What other characteristics would you consider to be necessary to be a good leader?
Being a good listener and genuinely listening with curiosity and empathy. And I think if leaders bring that to the table, whether they're new leaders or more experienced leaders, I think that's incredibly valuable because people, when they feel listened to, they trust you. When they trust you, that's when you can really uncover the potential, and that's how you can really engage them. And I'll share a quick story about when I was at Microsoft, and I was, early on, junior in my career. I was not yet a manager. I was an individual contributor, and I was working in the office in Ottawa. And the president of Microsoft Canada came for a visit. And he was, had customer visits, but then he took some time to meet with a few employees in a one-on-one meeting. So I was lucky enough to get this one-on-one meeting. And of course, I'm a little intimidated. I haven't been with Microsoft long. This is somebody who's really big and important. So I'm a little intimidated, but I remember walking into the office where the meeting was. And rather than sit behind the desk, this gentleman pulled his chair around so that we were sitting side by side. And he leaned forward and he said, "Tell me about yourself." And it was just like this moment of, wow, like he's not trying to intimidate me. He really wants to know who I am and what I think is important. And it was just this really small motion of where he put the chair, how he leaned forward and into the conversation, that from that moment on, I went, yeah, it really is about listening. And it really is about engaging through that.
Do you think anyone can be a leader?
That is, to me, it's about, you have to want it, but you have to be also willing to do the work of leadership. And I'm talking about the kind of leadership that I think is important today. Leadership isn't a position. Leadership is about the actions that you take. So if people are willing to take the actions, they're willing to develop themselves, then I think, yeah, anybody can be a leader because it doesn't matter about your title. It matters about who you are and how you are.
Mm-hmm. So as someone who works with innovation companies, why do you think some large global corporations are resistant and hesitate to innovation?
The status quo, right? We're all human. And when you think about change, a lot of times we say, yes, we're comfortable with change, but in reality, we're more or less programmed to stay exactly the same way we are today and not to seek out uncertainty. So when you put, a company who's been successful, they've got their revenue predictable, they know who their customers are, it's really, really tough to shift that and say, okay, now we're going to innovate. We're going to think about a completely new market. We're going to disrupt the market we're in. We're going to change the products or services that we offer. It's really tough. And I think at the core of it, it's about that uncertainty. And, it's great when you know who your customers are and you know where your revenue is. It's tough to then sort of say, we're going to change that and we're going to refocus, and we don't know what it's going to look like.
Mm-hmm. I can also think about like some large corporations who failed to innovate and then unfortunately ended up tanking, such as like Blockbuster and Kodak. So I think if anything, large corporations, to stay competitive, they really should look into how they can become innovative and how to keep on innovating in this day and age. Would you agree?
Oh, yeah, I couldn't agree more. And there was a stat, I forget exactly what it was, but it used to be the number of companies on the Fortune 500. It was something like, let's say 50 years, 25 or 50 years was the average length of time a company would be on that list. Now it's down to 10 years. So I think that illustrates, how fast change is happening and how important innovation is. And, the fact that companies aren't doing it fast enough when they're at that level. But you made me think of something else that gets in the way when you mention, companies like Blockbuster that just failed to innovate. One of the things that gets in the way is ego. right? You think you're already doing it really well. What could somebody else have to teach you? So I think that's a huge one that gets in the way of innovation and change.
Mm-hmm. So on the other end, more often than like startups, they're huge advocates for innovation. So what would you say are some key innovation strategies if they're looking to scale?
Well, there's a couple of things. I mean, when we look at the startup and the innovation community, right, they're all about disrupting the status quo. So they can do that by disrupting the market. So they can kind of create a new market for their products or their services. They can, disrupt products and services that already exist. So what market do we sell? Are we going to create a new market? Or are we going to create this net new product or service that nobody has seen before? So those are some of the different options that they can explore in terms of how they go to market and where they can find their foothold. I think what they really have to be thinking about, and what they do think about, and what we see every day at the Innovation Center, is you've got to get customers on board, right? So there's a very predictable customer journey for startups, right? You start with the idea, then you have to do some discovery, right? Is this really a valid idea? Does something already exist? What are the alternatives? So you do that kind of research. And then the next stage is validation. You have to go out, you have to actually talk to people who would buy this and get their feedback, right? So you make those changes, you figure out what does the minimum viable product look like, get that feedback, and then start to get those first few critical paying customers on board. So, as you get through that validation stage, then you get into efficiency and scale. And during those stages, that's when you're optimizing your operations, you're bringing your team on board, you're growing your executive staff. So you're kind of building it step by step. So from that perspective, it's a little bit predictable. But it's a tough journey, right? There's always lots of unknowns and things that can get in the way.
Are there any particular startups that come to mind that have disrupted a certain industry that you are really interested in or that you're currently working with now?
Yes, we have actually one in particular that I can use as an example, where it's what they're doing is they're disrupting nitrogen, the way nitrogen gas is used and delivered when it comes to food and food processing. So, there's ways today, you see those trucks on the road that are transporting nitrogen gas. Well, there are other ways to do that and to create that. So we're working with one company who I feel like really has an opportunity to disrupt the way people are doing things today and to disrupt the market that they're in. So they would be a good example. We see, so many different types of innovations from, digital media and ICT, advanced manufacturing, med tech and life tech. We get the opportunity to see them all across the board. So when you ask one or two examples, it's so tough when we work with hundreds of companies. There's so many fantastic and interesting ideas.
Mm-hmm. So I know you're a huge advocate for women in tech, and I feel that the term women in tech is pretty popular. It's used a lot these days, and in the media and in conversations. So in your opinion, what would you consider to be the definition of a woman who's in tech?
Well, I would probably go with the definition that it is broad. So women in technology can be those who are working in a technical role. So, whether that may be they're working as programmers or they're, working on IoT and hardware, whatever it is. So they're working in a technical role. I would also consider it to be women who are working in the technology companies. So if you're working for a Microsoft, you're in tech, it influences everything that you do every day. So those who work in the technology industry, and then also those who are working in technical roles in organizations that we may not initially think of as technology-based organizations, but perhaps they work in the IT departments or something to that effect. But I think that the interesting piece about women in tech is that today all companies have to be tech companies of some variety. So I think pretty soon when we say women in tech, we're going to start to look at, those who touch technology, make decisions about technology, buy technology, or know how to be productive and optimize with technology. So I think it's going to stay pretty broad. But my ultimate hope is that we'll see more and more women who have the technical skills, comfort, and savvy to be part of it.
Mm-hmm. And you're involved actually in a lot of technology, women in technology initiatives based on your bio. I was wondering if you could briefly describe each of them, starting off with the women in communications and technology.
Sure. Yeah. I've been working with an organization called Women in Communications and Technology for, quite a number of years since my time at Microsoft. And currently what I'm working on with them is what's called a blueprint for women's leadership. And this is about looking at the practices that large companies have in place that help to advance women in technology roles and promote more women into senior leadership positions. So with them, I've been working on, how do we take all the different practices and look at what are the ones that represent true leadership? What are the ones that represent emerging leadership? What does it look like when you're just at the start of that journey? And we've organized all these practices in such a way as to give organizations an ability to look at what do we do today to help develop and advance and promote women in the organization, and what could we do to be even more effective in doing that so that we've got a gender diverse workforce. So that's been a really exciting project. I've had the opportunity to talk to, probably over 300 or 400 different leaders across Canada and understand what works, what doesn't work, and what the most effective actions are to move to the point where we have much more gender equity in technology roles and leadership than today when we're sitting at somewhere around 30%. So that's been a lot of fun and really engaging, and lots of great conversation and a ton of opportunity for Canadian organizations to move forward.
Mm-hmm. And hashtag her Halton.
Hashtag her Halton is when I joined Haltech, the team had already been working on her Halton, and it started about 3 years ago with an International Women's Day, and the team decided, well, why don't we do a breakfast? Why don't we celebrate the achievements of women in business and leadership and technology across Halton Region? So as I understand it, that first breakfast, they thought, if we get 30 people to come out, that'll be a good day. And then I think somewhere around 75 showed up. And then from there, it sort of sprung into, peer-to-peer meetings and discussions, more Women's Day events. So last year we had well over 100 or 120 people. This year we're planning another event that's taking place on March 5th at Rattlesnake Point in celebration of International Women's Day. And, we'll probably see somewhere around 150 people join us for that. So it's just been a great opportunity for us to bring together women and men and any other supporters who want to really celebrate what's going on as it relates to gender diversity in the region and business success for everyone. So that's been her Halton, and it's been tons of fun, and we're continuing to move that forward.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I'm not a morning person, but I went to it last year, and it was definitely worth waking up early for. I really enjoyed the speakers. Sorry, what was that?
I said, I hope we'll see you there this year too.
Yeah, actually, I will be attending, and I thought it was also great to see a few men attending the event as well, because I think, like, even though we say it's like celebrate women and to have conversations with, of course, like, men are invited as well, if they want to learn more about how to incorporate women in tech or women in leadership. Of course, you'd want to attend these events and have those conversations with women.
And you know what, Karen, to me, this is a really, really important topic. I recently did an interview talking about her Halton, and that was my point as well. And this year, the theme for International Women's Day is Each for Equal. And I would love to see more men come out and join us, right? Because the men And when we get into this discussion about equality, that means everybody has to be part of the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And we all have to learn together. We all have to collaborate. But the more men we see who come and join us, and we make them feel comfortable at these events, like they can ask questions and they can, raise topics and discussion. I mean, I think that's really gonna get us a lot farther faster. And I've said, when I think about her Halton and some of the women's events, that guys, you've got wives or girlfriends or sisters or daughters or cousins, whatever it is, come along to these events and participate, because we do want to hear what you have to say, and we want to share what we're thinking about.
Yes, definitely. Okay, so the third initiative is Innovation Factory's Accelerator for Women Entrepreneurs. Could you give a brief summary on that?
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to. So our sister Regional Innovation Center in Hamilton, I had been doing some work with them as an entrepreneur in residence. And with the team there, we were talking about the fact that when you look at technology companies, there are only about, on average, 13% or so who are female founders. So not great. And we decided that we wanted to put together a program to help more women further their entrepreneurial thinking and focus it not just on what are some of the business topics that every entrepreneur needs to be thinking about, but what are some of the things that women in particular face, and what are the challenges, but not just the challenges, what are the opportunities that can really make them successful, and what would unlock opportunities for them to create new markets or find new customers. So we started that up, and the group is still going. They have some fantastic events there that are really focusing on some of the things that women have identified as being really important, like, my negotiation skills. I feel like I just don't do as great of a job as I could. So we put together a session and talked about negotiation skills. There was a discussion that we had around pitching to male investors, because if you pitch your idea, let's say you've got a product, and I've seen a number of companies who have a product or service that is meant to be marketed to women. Let's say it's for, health of some variety and issues that only women deal with. Well, when you pitch to male investors, they may not understand the market. They may not understand the implications of your solution. So how do you make sure that you pitch in such a way that those investors understand what you're trying to do, and hopefully give you the capital so that you can grow and scale? So those are just some of the examples. So that was a program that we put together with funding from the Brookfield Institute, and the gang in Hamilton still has it going on, and we love to promote their events. And then that led us, as I got to Haltech, to another initiative called Beyond Boundaries. So that's when we're really focused on helping women entrepreneurs scale their business. So they've already got their business going, and it's about how do we help them take it to the next level.
Wow, I am just blown away by how many things you're involved in. I mean, even though this conversation is mainly about leadership and women in tech and innovation, I'd also like to know, how do you manage to juggle all of this?
It's funny because I didn't really stop to think about, am I involved in all that many things until you said it. But I would say, and this is also another lesson from along the way, nobody does anything by themselves. So I've always been fortunate that, I've got great teams, great colleagues, other people who are just, fabulous to be around, who I can tap into for their, whether it's hands-on support or idea generation or connections. I'd say, that's been a big learning, is you never accomplish anything on your own. You really have to surround yourself with smart people, talented people, people who are willing to do work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it kind of reminds me of this proverb, and hopefully I'm saying it properly. It's like, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go with others.
Yes, 100%.
Okay, so we've mentioned all the different initiatives. So as someone who is a leader, who's passionate about innovation and women in tech, what do you think, can we do more to create more opportunities and to create more progress and connect the two areas of innovation and women in tech together?
Yes, Exactly what that is. I feel like it's always a series of small steps. So I don't think it's like this one big, huge thing. But if I think about what I try to do in a day, it's always little things that hopefully down the road have a big impact. So, it's like throwing the pebble in the water and all the ripples it creates. But I think about, when I talk and work with our female tech entrepreneurs, I'm always thinking about what's one thing I can do to help them today. Is it an introduction? Is it a couple of words of encouragement? Is it, helping them just, sit down and make a decision that they're wrestling with? So for me, it's about every interaction that I have. What's one thing I can do to help those women entrepreneurs? And then when it comes to, how do we connect the entrepreneurial side to, innovation and technology? If I had that conquered, I don't know what I would do next. But again, for me, it's always like, well, what's the one action I can take? If somebody's wrestling with a technology decision, is there something I know that can help them? Or is there someone I can introduce them to that can help them? And then I think the last thing I would say is it's always about examples, right? So I love the opportunity to see young women, girls, students who come into our space here in Burlington or in Milton where we've got an office, and watch them if they're with their parents or relatives or whoever it may be. When the eyes open up and they see what it's like to be an entrepreneur and they see other women doing things that they could be doing. So I think that if you get a chance to show somebody and talk to them about what's possible, then I think there's motivation there for them to go and, do the learning, acquire the skills, and, make it happen for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Based on what you said, it makes it seem that like it's not as daunting, I guess, as most people would think, talking about just interacting, like making an introduction, just like making compliments or offering suggestions. And that's definitely, little steps that can help move things forward.
Yeah, exactly. And you know what? I think we all sometimes need encouragement. So sometimes it's just, hey, you're doing a good job, and I'd like to tell you that, right? So some days people just need to hear it.
Yeah, it makes a difference. Like, because you can easily tell yourself, oh, I'm doing a good job. This is great. I'm getting somewhere. But it makes so much more of an impact when somebody else tells you the same thing.
Yeah. And that would be, that's another great point that I've learned along the way is feedback is really important. And it's not always the positive and encouraging feedback. Sometimes being honest with people is what they need most from you.
Mm-hmm. So before we sign off, I'd like to talk about your improv training because I'm really curious to learn more about it. How did you get into it firsthand?
It was, honestly, I had read something in the local newspaper at the time about an improv group and an improv class that was starting. And I was curious about it. I had some experience with community theater and things like that. But I was traveling a lot, and, I was kind of getting out of touch with doing anything very creative. So it caught my eye. And, I've often heard people refer to it. It's a little bit of a gateway drug. So you try an improv class, and then that just, you want to try the next one and the next one. So that's what happened to me. It was about 10 years ago when I took the first class, and then I, got a little bit hooked and found some, some new skills and met some new people and just started to have fun with it. And then over the years, just took some more classes and, got into doing some performances. And now I'm part of the Oakville Improv Theater Company board. So yeah, that first class was that gateway drug for me.
What was it like performing the first time around?
Oh, I can tell you that it was one of those moments where you're like, what have I done? Why did I commit to doing this? I don't want to do it. It's for sure stage fright, but then, you get out there, and the thing with improv is, you're going to fail. So, just take it, accept it, learn from it, and go do it again. So I had lots of times where things did not go very well and it wasn't fun. But then it's like anything else. You get that one moment when you genuinely felt like you did a good job and the audience was there with you, and you hear the laughs or you hear them feel like they've really tapped into some emotion, then it makes it all worthwhile.
Mm-hmm. I had no idea like Oakville even had an improv group. Like, because when I hear improv, I automatically think of Second City, and Second City's like in Toronto. So I didn't realize like they had improv groups that were more local.
Oh yeah, so we've got the second Friday of every month at QE Park. There's a family theater sports show. And then the last Sunday of every month at the Kerr Street, on Kerr Street at the Moonshine Cafe, we do more of the adult performances where it's beverages are available and it's a little bit more of a bar setting and a completely different type of show and lots of fun.
Oh, I'll have to check it out. So how has your improv training like translated into your current role as the executive director for Haltech? Because you mentioned, you gained some skills, and what particular skills did you find were useful in your improv training?
It really, for me, it's this whole concept of saying yes. And saying yes doesn't mean that you're going to do everything, but saying yes and how I translate it into what I do professionally is it's about creating the possibility. So, for example, if I said to somebody, do you want to go on a picnic? And they say no, well, there's nothing else to talk about, right? There's nothing else that we can do after a no. But if I were to say that and somebody said, yes, I'd really like to do that, I'll pack the sandwiches. Well, now you've got some action. So if you put that into a work setting, every day we hear ideas and consciously or subconsciously we shut them down. Well, that'll never work. No, you can't do that. There's not enough money. So if you put that aside for a minute and open up by saying yes and create an opportunity for letting ideas emerge a little bit, you may get to places that, were previously unavailable, right? So if you shut things down, you're never going to get there. But if you create this open environment where you take suggestions and offers and you see where they go, then you can decide what action you're actually going to take. But you've got to give ideas room to breathe. And I think that's where, for me, improv comes into my professional life and some of those techniques around saying yes and building off of ideas.
So would you recommend entrepreneurs to take improv classes?
I absolutely would. In fact, we've done a couple here at Haltech where I've just shared with groups, here's what I've learned and let's have some fun and play with some of the improv games and techniques. So for sure, it helps you think on your feet. It helps you generate ideas, brainstorm. There's all kinds of great benefits. So absolutely would recommend it.
Awesome. So if people wanted to connect with you online, where can they find you?
Probably the best place to find me is LinkedIn. So it's Shann McGrail, and I'd be happy to connect with people. That'd be wonderful.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much again for chatting with me today. It was really great conversation.
Thank you so much, Karen. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks everyone for tuning in, and stay tuned for more episodes. Ciao for now.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Bacon Bits and Bytes podcast. If you enjoyed the content, please subscribe, leave a review on iTunes, and share this podcast with your family and friends. You can follow the podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Bacon Bits and Bytes. And on Twitter, it's BaconBits_Bytes. Ciao for now.